Welcome. Good morning. I'm Karen A. from Jerusalem. It is my honor to host the Reco12 Afro-Euro podcast in our time zone. We're a family of people who have recovered through the 12 steps of Alcoholics Anonymous, though we welcome people, all addictions, all afflictions, and all fellowships. Reco12 has a bunch of recovery resources at reco12.com, different podcasts, audio bits from Justin B, Nikki M, Noodle It Out with Nikki, Big Book Roundtables, and lots of amazing speakers like we're about to have today. If you'd like to contribute a seventh tradition that helps cover the cost of Zoom and other technical costs, you can go to reco12.com/support, and we accept PayPal or Venmo. If you'd like to share on Reco12 in our time zone, I'd love for you to private message me, and I will put my number in the chat. We'd love to have more speakers from the Afro-Euro time zone, or if you're in other time zones, just like you stayed up all night to get your drug of choice or your drink of choice, join us here, stay up late, wake up early, whatever you got to do. We want more speakers in our time zone here, so that would be a great service. Without further ado, I'm so honored to present to you Silvio D, my sponsee brother, my sponsee group. We've never met physically, although he's in the UK. I'm in Jerusalem. We're part of the same family, and so all are you. So welcome, my brothers and my sisters. Welcome, Silvio D. We'd love to hear your story. We'll have about 25 minutes to share. I'll keep an eye on the time, although I'm somewhat liberal. If you want a hard time, you let me know that. And then we'll take Q&A. Listeners on the line, you can jot down your questions. If you're worried about forgetting them, if age is getting the best of you, like it is for some of us, you could jot them down in the chat, and then Silvio will address them after his share. And we'll try to get to as many people as possible, and hopefully everybody. If you're looking for a sponsor or you're available to sponsor, you can also let us know in the chat. And I'll put my number in. Silvio will put his number in, and you can reach out with any questions, comments, burning desires to share, sponsorship issues, etc. Welcome, Silvio.
Thank you, Karen. Thank you for asking me to share today. It's always an honor to be asked and to do service. Thank you for taking the meeting as well. My topic today is non-negotiables of recovery. So let me caveat that just very quickly. These are my non-negotiables. I think it's up to everybody to find their own non-negotiables. And, anything that I might be saying here is merely suggestive. And, you need to find your non-negotiables with your sponsor, of course, and with the people who are in your recovery circle. Having said all that, let's talk about non-negotiables. What are they? Non-negotiables are actions, because it's an action-based program. We know this is a spiritual program of action. Without action, we don't recover and we don't stay recovered. And so these are actions I take every single day. Not one day goes past where I don't do most of them, and we'll get into them in a moment. But let's talk quickly how we defined non-negotiables. So the dictionary says that a non-negotiable is something, in this case an action, which is not open to discussion or reconsideration. Think of it like there are other non-negotiables in our lives. There's the law. Can't really negotiate with it. If you've ever tried an active addiction, negotiating your way out of a situation with a policeman or policewoman, then you will know this. Natural laws, they're also non-negotiables. You can try and make your views known to gravity. It doesn't care. It's just gravity. So these are non-negotiables. They're not open for discussion. They're not open for reconsideration. And what is really interesting is that we have this tendency to start negotiating, mainly often at the beginning of our journey. So when we come into the program and we don't know anything yet, and we have a sponsor and they're asking us to do all of these things, and we tend to want to negotiate our way into or out of some of them. What is interesting here is that the book obviously pays homage to this, and at some of these steps we balked. I think is one of the best known phrases as far as that is concerned, right? That we don't want to do all of the program. Okay. And amazingly, also, what I see all the time is that we tend to start negotiating our way out of what are non-negotiables when we're making progress and we feel good. Time and again, we see this when we come into the rooms, all of a sudden, after we go through the process of the 12 steps, we feel better and life is kinder to us and things return. Our partners return, our jobs return, or we get a promotion or whatever it is. And before you know it, we start negotiating with the non-negotiables. So let's look into what they actually are. These are my non-negotiables. I'm repeating myself, but just so we're clear, these are my non-negotiables. I hope that you will find yours. Mine are the following. The morning routine. So I start the moment I wake up. And I mean the moment I wake up. The first thing that I do is I say the step 3 and the step 7 prayer. And I do this because my mind is like a searchlight. It is going to look immediately the moment I wake up. It's going to look for vulnerabilities, right? In order to create anxiety. So I will immediately start scanning almost like, is there anything wrong with my relationship? Did she say something funny yesterday? Something yesterday at dinner. I'm sure that she said something funny. Or, is there something wrong with with my body? And am I a bit unwell maybe? Or whatever it is. My mind will, like a searchlight, try and find different bits and pieces that it can then go into and obsess over. And if I use the prayer right the very first moment that I wake up, there's a tendency for that to just dissipate. That moment dissipates, and I immediately bring a little bit of light into proverbial and almost literal darkness. That's the very first thing that I do. And it came to me maybe a year and a half or so into recovery. So this is another way also of saying that they don't fall out of the sky ready-made. These non-negotiables, they come to us over time, and they're a practice that we keep working on. And the rest then of my morning routine is I go downstairs, I meditate, and what's most important is that before we start our morning routine, that we don't look at our social media, we don't look at our business emails, we don't look at the text that someone sent maybe late last night, people who might want to rile us up about something. We don't look at whatever it is, your stock investment or anything really. Preferably go to the bathroom and immediately afterwards you go and meditate. I know this isn't always practical and I needed to make room for this in order for this to happen, but I need to connect first with the power that is greater than me, and preferably before I have any other influence. So I meditate. A word about meditation. I hear this so often. Yeah, I'm happy with prayer, but I can't really meditate. Now, there's so many ways to meditate. The book really speaks of contemplation rather than meditation as we understand it today. And I've tried this recently. It's really important that we change things up, that we don't always do the same thing, a bit like we don't eat the same food every day. So contemplation, sitting it silently, maybe even with a pad and of paper and a pen, and asking God things like, how can I be useful today? What do I need to look out for today? And of course, we've got very clear instructions on page 86 about what to do in the morning. And if we just go by those and we ask our higher power to be divorced from selfishness and self-seeking and so on, but also ideas will come to us. Oh, I need to reach out to this person that was struggling. Or I forgot about this or that. And it's another way to connect, of course, and to listen. This is the part where we're listening. And other meditations, there's so many out there. And if you feel uncomfortable about sitting quietly for any length of time, I totally understand that. It is something that we learn over time. So there's YouTube is your friend. There's many apps like Insight Timer. They have guided meditations. Makes it a lot easier to just sit quietly and learn to sit quietly with oneself. I'm not sure which famous author and spiritual author it was that said that most of man's problems, I'm paraphrasing, most of man's problems come down to the fact that we're uncomfortable or we are unable to sit alone in a room. And unless we do that and learn to do that, it's really difficult to hear our higher power speaking to us. and it will speak if we give it that quiet space. But other things are available. There are walking meditations. There are meditative actions, things that are usually like, I don't know, cooking can be one, for instance. I've heard that needlework and that kind of stuff, and there's no pun intended here. And those sort of things that you do with your hands that keep you busy, they can be meditative, right? So I meditate, and the next thing is prayer. Now, we have so many wonderful prayers. I also, after saying a couple of the ones that are dear to my heart and that I feel close to on that particular day, I will speak freely with my higher power, right? About things that are on my mind, about asking for guidance, asking for a sober day, asking if it's a day where I have a lot of fear, for the fear to be removed, whatever it is. And it's so important to me. We've heard this all along, and this is maybe no news in that respect about what it is that we do, but the concept of non-negotiable is the important bit here. So in my prayer, I will speak. In meditation, I listen. In my prayer, I speak. Then I do a list of gratitudes, 10 gratitudes, and I list 5 things as well that I don't miss about my drinking and using life, right? So 10 grats about what I'm grateful for, and then 5 things that I don't miss. What's on there? Mostly things like I don't miss waiting for dealers. I don't miss nosebleeds. I don't miss nausea and puking. I don't miss being so full of rage and deep resentment, those sort of things. And they just remind me of where I've come from, because we have a disease, of course, that is all about forgetfulness. And so we need these reminders. And then last but not least, I will do some readings. I will just read a few things that I'm being sent, and I send some around in the WhatsApp groups as well, from different books, just spiritual stuff. And maybe from the AA daily prayer, daily thought, from that one. All of this takes about 35 minutes roundabout. And I've had to change the way I do stuff in the morning and rearrange everything in order to be able to have this, right? Now, of course, we're all human. That means what happens when, your alarm doesn't go off or whatever else, and you've had a rough night because you have a young child or something like that. I have let's call it an emergency version of this, which is I just write down 5 grats, I say 2 prayers, and I'm off and running. It takes about a minute, and yet I have connected. This is a non-negotiable. The morning routine is a non-negotiable, and to the extent that I practice this, the morning routine in particular, the better my day is going to go. It is so clear for me to see that whenever I have slacked on this, that my day just kind of goes all over the place, and I'm just full of self-seeking, usually, because that's one of my biggest problems, and often also really, really full of fear. The next thing is my evening inventory moment. Now, I like the fact that we bookend the day in the morning and the evening with recovery. We need to do this. And so, of course, in the evening, I do my nightly review, and it is really, really important, and I finish with a prayer, right? None of this is new. I understand that. But the question is, why do we argue with these things that keep us well, right? There's a couple of more before we go into why we argue with them. On any given day, I need to also fulfill commitments, right? Either is I'm taking sponsorship, right? So that's when I'm still going through the steps, or when I'm going through the steps again, or when I'm working with my sponsor on, say, things like my non-negotiables. Or otherwise, I give sponsorship, right? So that is me sponsoring my sponsees and being there for them, right? This has to be part of my daily life. If it isn't, my spiritual condition is going to go off. And let's not forget, we do this in order to connect to our higher power and stay connected to our higher power, which is the thing that keeps us clean, sober, or away from those behaviors that keep us sick. Sponsorship is therefore the next one. And of course, I understand that sometimes, I don't know why this happens, but sometimes, with our best intentions, we might go to our groups, we put up our hand when, there is a sponsorship call, and, if you're available for sponsorship and so on and so forth. And yet, for some reason, for a couple of months or maybe longer, no one asks you. I've been in that place, and there's no reason why. And you think, I'm doing a good program, I'm working it, and so on and so forth. And yet somehow it doesn't seem to enter my life. In which case, you can still help others and it has to be part of your day. So that means that's your daily outreach calls. Do you actually do them? 1 or 2, right? At the very least, where you inquire with your people around you, other addicts, newcomers who've come into the room, just to be part of their recovery. And again, this is a non-negotiable in my life. I have to have these things in order to stay well. And another thing that has recently come to me, which is a non-negotiable, is self-care. It is the other end of the spectrum almost, and something that I've been discussing lots in the last few weeks or so, where we can end up doing too much. If this rings true to you, what I'm going to say, then self-care is perhaps one of the most important things that we can talk about. If this sounds like you get up, you are immediately, you do your gratitudes and your morning routine and so on. On your way to work, you listen to a share. In your lunch break, you're speaking to all your sponsees. In the evening, you have a quick dinner, and then you are in a meeting, and then you have another commitment and another commitment and another commitment. You go to bed, you do your inventory, and you do this 7 days a week. It's going to drive you absolutely mad. Why? Because you haven't had time to breathe and think and be yourself. And there is a tendency, and this is something that has been really relevant for me over the last few months or so, there's a tendency to fill every moment just with recovery-related stuff. And while this may be really important in the beginning, I have found that there is a tendency for me to not, how can I say this, to not look after myself. So the questions that I had to ask myself were these. When was the last time I listened to a nice playlist, right? When is the last time I went for a nice drink, obviously non-alcoholic drink, for a nice drink with a coffee or something with a friend of mine who's not in the rooms, right? How much of a life do I actually still have, right? Because we need to be on the firing lines, it says in the book. And I can't do that if I am in always at all times just with my head in recovery. I know this can be exploited. I am aware of this. I know that this can be exploited by our illness and by the way we, by our illness really. But I have found that if I am doing too much, there can be such a thing, that all of a sudden I'm starting to be unhappy because I've not really had moments to myself. I've not, as I said, are you listening to music? When was the last time that you went to a play? Or whatever, floats your boat, or a monster truck show, whatever it is that you like, right? But are you actually looking after yourself? Are you sleeping enough, or are you just getting 4 hours every night because you are sponsoring 18 people, right? It sounds selfish, and there's a great possibility for misunderstanding here, because we have an illness which is based in selfishness and self-centeredness, and this is absolutely true. But self-care, on the other hand, is also a non-negotiable. This is a very fine line to walk. And yet I have found, and this is something I've seen with other people in my recovery circle, that if we sponsor too many people, then all of a sudden we might not really be there for all of them properly. And we might not really be able to, our spiritual condition will not really allow us to be able to tell them what it is that they need to hear in that moment. We're not really there for them, right? So we can be overcommitted, right? So it is really, really important. Are you sleeping well? Are you eating halfway well, right? So obviously this is a really important thing as well. Self-care. It's so basic. It's a non-negotiable. And there is a danger that we don't do enough of it. Which brings me to the last one of the non-negotiables, and that is joy. Now, I know that this is, it sounds counterintuitive, but it really isn't. Again, this sort of dovetails a little bit with self-care. Joy is, do you do anything that brings about in you that kind of childlike joy, right, that needs no explanation, right? So for me, I've always been a petrol head. Since I was a little boy, I've always liked cars and motorbikes and all that kind of stuff. I can't explain it. It might look really silly to other people, but it is something that gives me great joy. Looking after cars, looking after motorbikes, driving, riding, and so on and so forth, right? It is the sort of thing that I do that lets me just quite naturally forget about troubles that I might have and or feeling troubled and so on and so forth. They just give me natural joy. That can be anything and everything, right? Cooking, gardening, snooker. As I said, I'm a petrol head. Cars, motorbikes, sports, anything. It can be anything, but it is so, so, so important that we have this in our lives. Again, it might just be that we are overcommitting in certain areas in our lives. We're not very good at balance, I think it's fair to say, most of us who are addicts and alcoholics and addicts of any kind, really. So finding some sort of balance is really, really important. I guarantee you that if you have this sort of childlike joy in your life, right, whatever that is, and sometimes we need to relearn them, these things, you're going to halve your step 10 practice simply because you're not going to get all that riled up as easily as that. There is more spirituality to be found in joy than meets the eye, in pure childlike joy. So that is also one of my non-negotiables. Of course, I can't have all of that in any given day. So you need to sort of see that some things you have to have in your day, your morning practice, your evening practice. But if we're talking about self-care and joy in particular, and maybe even step work and those sort of things, maybe you need to even it out over, say, a week or so, right? So you can't, this is not a tick boxing exercise. Oh, done this, done that. It is more something that you see over any length of time, right? A week is always usually quite a good length of time to measure things by. And I think it's important that we have all of these. These are non-negotiables, as I said. But we need to also expect resistance. There is such thing as spiritual resistance. And I think a lot has been said about the subject already, but let me just go into it just for a second. I don't know where it comes from exactly, resistance. Eckhart Tolle speaks of the pull of the unconscious, and we hear there's so many even biblical references to it. I don't know. It is part of the human condition to experience resistance to the things that make us feel good, that keep us well, right? It is my opinion that we pick up our chips whenever we do of sobriety or abstinence, right, as a nod to the resistance that we have overcome, right? Because we need to overcome this resistance to experience it, go through it, and come out at the other end in order to experience spiritual well-being. So expect resistance. Just because you're experiencing resistance doesn't mean that you're a bad person, doesn't mean that you're not doing it right, doesn't mean there's something terribly wrong. We all experience resistance. It is important that we get through that resistance. And that is why we pick up chips, I think, right? That say, oh, I've been sober for X amount of time. Because that's the only thing that we are contributing in many ways. The rest is not up to us. The rest is obviously up to God. And getting over this resistance, I think, is a really key thing. And it is something that I think needs to be discussed with our sponsors and needs to be discussed with the people around us. Again, finding your non-negotiables and how to overcome resistance to them is part of sponsorship work. And is part of discussing it with your recovery circle. So I often think of these non-negotiables as a blanket that is too small. So in other words, either your head's a bit cold, or your arm's a bit cold, or your foot's a bit cold. In other words, you're never going to be able to do all of them at all times perfectly. And perfectionism is a great, great, great evil, certainly in my life. So it is important that we listen to ourselves, and we will learn by our feelings and with the mistakes that we made, where we are going wrong. Am I not really connecting? That means I need to sort of look into my meditation. I need to look into my prayers. Am I looking after everything and everyone, but I'm just dragging through the day? Well, then I need more self-care and more joy, right? And again, I'm repeating myself. This is something that needs to be discussed with the people around us, okay? And with our higher power. So to sum up, the non-negotiables cannot be altered. They need to be discussed. They are our everyday practice that keeps us connected, that connects us in the first place, and that keeps us connected. And like all other non-negotiables, they are just things that we do without thinking about them. I don't argue every day whether I need to brush my teeth. I don't think, oh, you know what, my breakfast wasn't all that heavy. I don't really need to brush my teeth. Or I happen to be mildly asthmatic. I don't look at my inhaler and sort of think, I don't know. I don't really think I need an inhaler today, right? These are things that I just do as part of my ritual, part of my routine. And we have non-negotiables everywhere, and we need them in our recovery. Thank you.
Wow. This is so amazing. Non-negotiables of recovery. I want to thank you, Silvio. You're such a gentleman. It's so refreshing to have a gentleman, a recovered gentleman. And I love that you spoke that you're a petrol guy. Not because I relate, because I don't, but I was just doing step 3 with the beautiful sponsor yesterday. And it talks about the God concept being the keystone, right, to the arch, which leads us to freedom. And when I was breaking that down with the sponsee, it's like, how do we know something the keystone in our arch is like, is it getting me closer to God or is it not? And that's so different for everyone. I love that for you, that's petrol. For me, it might be Pilates, right? For someone else, it might be nature. And yet, as our fellow young L has, warned me, just be careful, because that could also be a log. We need our recovery, we need our spiritual work. But I love that you're talking about non-negotiables, because really in this program, I realized that exercise had become a non-negotiable for me. I realized on summer vacation when I found myself getting really spiritually sick, even though I'm leading this podcast, that, if we've been around in these rooms or as we go in our journey, with progress, not perfection, we realize those things that, are beyond the freedom of choice. It's no longer a choice anymore, right? The first things, of course, being steps 10, 11, and 12. And then like Silvio D said, there are some other categories. Can you share a little bit about your journey to discovering those non-negotiables? Like, how did you get through the 12 steps? How did you realize that there were certain things that just had to be a part of your spiritual lifestyle, had to be a part of your regimen?
Yes, of course. Thank you, Karen. Some things I was shown immediately, of course, by just going through the steps. So, of course, some of this, we could sum most of these things up in the steps, right? And so the first time I went through the steps, I acquired quite a lot of them. But I started, when I came into recovery, I was nobody comes in a good place. I was beaten down, and I realized that I needed to change radically, and that included the way I went about my day and everything. Really, it was such a moment of revolution in the sense of nothing will ever be the same again. So what I took some time to really think about how to organize my day differently. I had to come up, or rather was guided to, and then adjusted things myself with the morning routine and so on. And then the rest, I'm afraid, I got through going wrong, running into walls, and learning lessons. So pain being the cornerstone of spiritual growth. I have, with all of these things, come to a point where, with the non-negotiables, where I was either negotiating with them and realized there is no point in negotiating with them. So it's experiential, in other words. Some things I took on really happily, and other things not so much, right? So at some of these, we balked, and I balked. And often I went wrong, and I've run into quite a few into a few walls with this. I mean, I had one in particular, let's call it a spiritual relapse, where everything kind of went back out of the window about a year into recovery. So quite early on. And I needed to do the steps again. I just start over because I had negotiated with the non-negotiables, right? And some of the step work that I had done to the best of my ability, but my step 3 in particular was really lacking. So in other words, it's experiential. Some of it is guided and some of it is experiential.
Yeah, I definitely relate to that. And nothing like a little bit of pain or hard knocks to teach you something, right? No light without the dark, as they say. Tell me something. Can you share about your work with others?
Mm-hmm.
How many people you work with, when you started working with others, what worked, what didn't, take in every direction that you think can be helpful. Because, of course, as we say, our job is to be of maximum service.
Mm-hmm.
Our job is to be helpful.
Yeah. So after I went through the steps, it took a little while, a few months or so before someone approached me for sponsorship. And in that time, I had quite a few commitments. So I was host of a meeting just like you are at the moment, and I was, I think, greeter at my local face-to-face meeting, and so those things kept me afloat, so to speak, before I was approached for sponsorship. And at the moment, I'm working with 4 guys. I think that is quite a good number. I don't think I would do more because I also work and I have other commitments, and then there's commitments to people in my life, my wife, our dog, and so on and so forth. So it is important, of course, that we're not brilliant sponsors and then really terrible husbands, right? So that is really important. And in terms of sponsorship, it is one of the great joys of my life, to guide people as best I can. And often I have to call my own sponsor and say, well, I've got this problem with this sponsor and I don't really quite know what to do. And then you get advice from others, right? It helps me to stay spiritually well if I do my sponsorship well. I think it's fair to say that just by going through the book over and over and over, we hear this every day, and still it is my experience as well, is that it just fortifies my own recovery, just fortifies my understanding of my own condition. It fortifies my understanding of this illness, and it prevents me from going back as long as I am of maximum service to others. So sponsorship, and that is why sponsorship is a non-negotiable for many reasons. I mean, there's a whole chapter, of course, in the book about step 12. And it's a wonderful spiritual irony in many ways, is that we have to give it freely to keep it. So yeah, sponsorship is a non-negotiable.
I love that you mentioned your family. I also have a big family and a job and community commitments, and friends marrying off kids, and I need to be there for their weddings or bar mitzvahs or whatever, as is accepted in my circles. And I love that you work with 4 men. It's interesting. Someone, or Christy, who's in our group, said last week that his sponsor said that married men have a powerful message of recovery. So it's interesting and special and ironic that you're also a married man and just a gentleman, and sharing this experience, strength, and hope. And I'm just saying that as a woman, and so many people on the line, women particularly, have come to these rooms having really bad codependent relationships. I mean that not just in the coda sense, but in the original sense of the word, which is a little bit more of a Al-Anon theme, right? That they were the co of the dependent, not just in mess and all that kind of unhealthy stuff. Could you talk to us about how you're working your program and all your affairs, how that plays out?
Well, it's quite simple. If I work these principles in all my affairs, then things work out really, really well. my relationship with my wife has changed dramatically for the better, and not just because I've stopped drinking and using. I give you two examples really. One of them is that, you know how we learned things about ourselves sort of in hindsight about what we were like in our recovery, and these were things that before our recovery, and these were things that we kept hearing but weren't really paying attention to much. One of them is that my wife always used to complain that I never apologize, right? I was never apologetic. Even if I did something clearly wrong, I would never apologize. Step 10 has taught me to do that, right? It has taught me to, see where I go wrong and make amends quickly and not let anything fester. So I think honesty and being able to apologize are the things that come in right away, that come to mind right away about how I practice these principles in my relationship. Another thing that comes to mind, it's not as spiritual as that, but still, my wife would always sort of complain that she would be the one to get up first and set the table and do everything herself, and then I would just kind of waltz in a bit later and so on. And it made her never feel like she was special or looked after, that I would always be the one who would come to table last and, maybe not even in that good a mood. And of course, with having to change things around and having a morning ritual that takes about 35 to 40 minutes, I needed to start getting up a lot earlier than she does. And by the time I'm finished with all of my stuff, I am at the table first. I am able to be there, be present, be usually in a receptive mood and not just stuck in my head, because I've done all my morning meditation and so on. I have connected. And so all that moodiness that I might have brought otherwise has hopefully by that point dissipated, right? So it sounds really... I'm
just going to interject here. This is brilliant. I'm just going to interject, and you'll accept my apology for being very un-British and interrupting you. We do that here. We have chutzpah in Israel. There are a few things. I'm just going to bring everybody's attention here to the big book. What he's saying is he woke up and he did his own awakening, right? Step 11. So that means if I woke up depressed, if I woke up sad, all that has been handled. It doesn't mean I'm cheery. It doesn't mean, my endorphins have kicked in, but it's been handled, right? We've given it up. We've surrendered. We've asked the higher power to take care of that, right? If he's worked step 10, we've asked the character defects of moodiness, irritability, pessimism, whatever it may be, grouchiness, negativity to be removed. And then we turn to helping others. Well, isn't that nice? And your wife's right there. My kids are right there. I can make a lunch. I could fry an omelet, put it in a roll. You could put in a load of laundry, whatever it is. It's like if I've gotten, self out of the way and I've gotten character defects out of the way, i.e. if I've worked steps 10 and 11, and I know I've got my podcast later, or I know I'm speaking to my sponsee at 9 a.m., she may or may not call me, but it's like I'm honest, open-minded, and willing, and I've got it in the schedule, the program of action, vigorous, right? We launch into a course of vigorous action, right? That's like we sprint, right? Put on our running shoes, you don't do vigorous action in Birkenstocks, right? You don't do it in a lounge chair. Vigorous means you put on your sneaks, you put on your sweatpants, whatever your leggings, and you go.
You break a sweat.
So.
You break a sweat. I think that's how I define vigorous. You break a sweat.
Yeah. And it's worth it, right? Because that's why we all have the glow, because we're working with others and we're sweating, right? Our skin, that's good for our skin. Like Evie, right? So I just want you all to hear that, he's telling about his personal relationships, but he's talking about is a regimen of 10 and 11 and 12 that helps him practice these principles in all his affairs. I know there's some moms here on the line. So I've woken up, I've done my prayers, I've done my meditation. Well, then, I'll pray for their well-being in my prayers. I'll pack lunches, cut apples because I want them to be healthy. I'll make water bottles, and I'll keep that in mind, right? Because our job is to be of maximum service. And yesterday I was like, wow. One of my teens was like, Mom, thanks for all you're doing. I don't know if any of you guys have teenagers, but they don't usually say that. They often don't speak in words. So, step 9 promises. But we just got to keep going, whether we get the thank you or we don't. I just want to go back because there was a really good part of Esther Irina's question here that I don't think we tackled exactly when we spoke about sponsorship.
Yeah.
And I like this too, because it's like that self-care is so important. But, sometimes our sponsors use those. Do you work the workbook, Silvio, or you just use the big book?
I do the big book.
The big book, okay. Because in our workbook, those are referred to logs. Logs, things that keep us afloat for some time, but ultimately won't keep us permanently recovered. And I know Young has warned me about this. It's like, I need I need to hug my 8-year-old. I need to, swing a jump rope for my girls. And Young will be like, yes, but that won't be permanently recovered. Only this. And I was kind of surprised by his answer. I thought he'd give me a thumbs up or a heart emoji. And I got I gotta watch out. Yeah, I got an admonishment. But talk to me about that balance of encouraging people to do self-care and not letting them use that to bluff and not work their steps seriously. That's a great question Esther Irina asked.
So when it comes to work with sponsees and delivering that message, I think it is a fine line. So with any fine line that we walk, I think it's not something that I can give a sort of one size fits all answer to. But generally, if you're in your steps, more practice and more discipline is required, I think, in the beginning, more than you probably think. And so I will probably discuss practice and non-negotiables more than I do self-care. Having said that, I think I will insist more on non-negotiables and making sure that we know exactly what our morning routine is like and what we do in the evening and so on and so forth, and what kind of commitments do you have, and do you work those commitments, and do you call other people and so on, because our natural tendency, I think, is probably to slack a little bit. I've come across the self-care issue more with friends and fellows who have been in the program for a while and they're overworking themselves, with taking on too many sponsees, too many commitments, and then failing in family commitments maybe and self-care commitments. But still, also with my sponsees, of course, I do question and I do ask them if they eat well, if they sleep, or, you will hear it from them. If you do step work with someone, 3 times in a row, and every time they show up and they are, they look befuddled and just terrible, and you will ask, hey, are you okay? What's going on? Yeah, I've not slept well, and then let's talk about you sleeping. Is there a problem here? Can we talk about this? Is there something that you need to look after? What is it? What is your sleep hygiene like and things? Now that's a part of sponsorship that I'm a bit uncomfortable with because I'm not a doctor, right? And I'm not my qualification is that I'm in the book and that I've gone through the book and that I'm armed with the facts, as it were. So I don't want to dish out too much advice about stuff that I'm not qualified to give advice over. But things that you would say to a friend as well, and you would discuss with a friend as well. Are they eating properly? And are they, are there any things, any of those things that we all need to look after? Are you doing a bit of exercise? Are you getting out and about? All those sort of things I will give advice on, but I'm mostly first and foremost with the non-negotiables in terms of morning and evening routine and commitments and things. So I hope that answers the question.
I love that you said that, and taking it back to the big book. Last week, Chris D referred to this as the sane and sound ideal, right? The big book, I believe, talks about this with regards to the sex life and the sex ideal. But it's more like, I started exercising. I want to exercise every day, but I have a job, and coming every day at 11 rather than 9 is that a sane and sound ideal for my work? No. So the non-negotiable has to be more sane and sound. If we're using the big book, right? Not a doctor. I'm not a doctor. We're not psychiatrists. We're not the properly appointed authority for any of that. We're not here to be life coaches. So for me, it's the honesty to say a sane and sound ideal is, 2 times a week minimum. And then I got to figure out in a way that makes me not come to work with, my hair on fire and my tail between my legs and all of that. And I think that's a really good barometer. If I'm eating standing up, I may cook healthy. Is that a sane and sound? I don't know. I'm a lady. I'm a woman of God. I should be sitting down. I should a fork and a knife. Like we say, need us like a man, a human being, and then you just, like a lady. I see Roger has his hand up, so I don't want to take his time since we're nearing the last 10 minutes.
Oh, thank you very much. Hi, Silvio. Obviously, we see each other every Sunday.
Yes.
Well, I listen to you mainly because I'm not a massive sharer. But I just wanted to get your view on the concept of like the flip reverse, where you do get up at 5 a.m. You do your work. You do, and then you do the breakfast, and then you do this, and then you do that. And I know people call it codependency, but I don't really understand. Like, I don't really understand it, right? Because I'm sorry for the ladies on the call. You're supposed to be a bit of a man, aren't you? Like, that's like, you ain't got no problems. You do this, you do that, you do that. How do you deal with that?
Yeah, I really have got this idea of what it is like to be a man. Yeah, usually leads me down the wrong road, quite honestly. I think there's, as men, we are, I mean, of course, women have their own conditioning, and I don't want to comment on that because I'm not a woman. But as a man, I can tell, and I know from my own experience and from that of speaking to my fellows, is that we have our own conditioning, right? We're heavily conditioned, and part of that conditioning is to just never really sort of show our struggles, right? Never appear to be struggling. Yeah, that's right. But that's bullshit. I'm sorry, but that's what it is. Right?
Yeah.
And so therefore I bring my struggles. And it is one of the most important things in the program. And that's something that I say to my sponsees, hopefully often enough, is that you have to bring your struggles to the program. Otherwise, you're not doing it right. You have to bring your struggles to the program. And then, of course, and this sort of dovetails a little bit with what I said about joy. Do you lead a joyless life, right? If you're just always being sort of all male about it and just kind of go, well, it takes a lot to uphold that sort of false self, of being a guy and, I've got everything sorted and, I don't have to rely on anyone. I don't never need any help and all of that nonsense. That takes a lot of effort to keep that up. And it's also a very joyless place, I have found. Right. So the question is, do you have?
I'm gonna say it more dramatically. As our big book says, insanity or death. Aside from those people being full of hot air, they don't have a message of depth and weight. When they do that, whenever I hear a man share and he's too cool for school or too much, so I don't really buy it. Just an FYI. And usually they relapse. Our big book says insanity or death, honesty, open-mindedness, and willingness. It refers to men and women, but I'm just going to, throw down there, aside from it being hogwash, it's insanity or death, because if someone isn't working a real program and really apologizing when they're wrong, it doesn't mean you have to be mamby-pamby, but a relapse is right around the corner. Me think.
Yeah. So and if I can interject just quickly, like you've already touched on it, like you get work, you get life, you get kids, you get dogs, you get whatever. It all kicks in sometimes all in one go, right? So it's and everyone says you've got to do the program first, but it's like, what if you cannot do the program first? That's my question. What if you cannot do the program first? The program is...
Which part? Can I ask which part of the program? Because,
just a meeting. Listen. I love what you're saying about the meditation and that is all fine. But sometimes you wake up in the morning and maybe your meditation's not gone too well, and as you said, it's a kind of a tricky practice to get to. So you're just not in the right frame of mind.
Okay, if your spiritual condition is, if you've got a spiritual bad hair day, right, if that's what we're talking about, they happen to all of us, and you have to do more and not less, right? And And this is something that to really work out with your sponsor, particularly about your own life, right? So if you have, all the things, commitments, children, this, that, and the other, then you have to adjust your non-negotiables, right? Because they're still non-negotiable. That's the whole point of it. Yeah. You have to adjust them, right? If scheduling is your issue, right, then that's something that you really need to get into with your sponsor and work out, right? When can you do what in order to do the program, right? Now, the program is the basis of everything. It's the prism through which I view life. I can't do without it, like I can't do without my asthma inhaler, right, or other medication. If you had a heart condition, right, you wouldn't be arguing about whether you have time to take your medication and do what your doctor tells you, because you need it to live. And it's the same with the program. So in this way, the non-negotiables, they have to be, as the name suggests, they have to be in there, right? And you have to work it out with your sponsor, with the people in your recovery crew, but also with your family maybe, right? To say, right, I need this time, or I need to have whatever it is that you need to do, whatever the bit is that you're struggling with, right, in terms of scheduling and everything else. That is something that needs to be discussed with the people around you and your sponsor, right?
Yeah,
so that you can do that.
And I'm seeing some really appreciative comments on the chat and stuff. But let's just say, I don't know, let's say you're going on holiday at 3 a.m. What do? You get up at 2 a.m. and you finish work at 10.
Yeah.
Then you've got to get up at 2.
Let me stop you right there. If you get up at 2 a.m. because you have to get a flight, one, could you have not got a different flight, because 2 a.m. flights are brutal? Two, do you really need to work till 10 p.m. the night before, right? If you already know that you have to get up at 2 p.m., it makes no sense, right? So that is some basic unmanageability, if you ask me, right?
Some of us don't get a choice, right?
I think then there's a question of prioritizing. Is it more important to you, that you get that 3 a.m. flight, or that you have to work the night before till 10 p.m.? Is that more important to you than doing the things that you need in order to be recovered, to get recovery and stay recovered? It's a question of priorities then. And that's why they're non-negotiable. It's in the word.
Yeah. I'm going to jump in here. That's great what you're saying, Silvio. What Silvio's saying is according to do, because a price had to be paid. Now, it doesn't have to be Karen's price, it doesn't have to be Silvio's price, it doesn't have to be Emma D's price, it doesn't have to be Esther Rena's price. So the first thing is, if you're confused or you feel like you can't get to everything, the first thing the big book says is to pray, right? That's a step 11. When confused throughout our day, we need the next intuitive thought or action. We're going to stop and we're pray. I did this yesterday. God, I'm so overwhelmed. I have so much to do. I have to do my taxes. I have to take care of my property tax. I have to take care of my income tax. Go to work. I want to exercise. I have to make supper. I have to start planning for the upcoming holidays. God, you take this. You take this. And miracles happen. You have to put some space in there. You have to pray. And I thought I was going to have to go to the municipality and stand in line. I'm like, I'm going to do that. And I had a headache. And then I paused and I was like, wait a minute. I have the WhatsApp for the deputy mayor. He knows me. I could just WhatsApp him. And the whole thing, I thought I was going to have to stand in line. I took care of it all with a phone call and an online form. But see, if I was not on the broad highway, if I was self-flow run riot, if Karen was running the show, so you really got to stop and pray, Roger. You really got to stop and ask God to help direct your thoughts. And when you can't stop, when you are at work, you could say, God, help me in this situation. I will not mind be done. Our big book clearly tells us that in step 11. You are to say to yourself throughout the day, I am no longer running the show. That is a full prayer. You don't have to even put that in your calendar. If someone upsets you in the office, God is everything or God is nothing. Okay, God, you sent that person. I'm no longer running the show. Humbly bow my head. What is the next right thing? That's all you got to do. And if you do it sincerely, it's a big one.
Yeah.
Let's go on and take the next question here. I see Esther Arena has her hand up, and we're going to have to wrap up soon.
Yes. Yeah. Sorry. Maybe I'm not. I don't know. Maybe I'm not getting across. Let's say that my wife books the flight and my boss sets the meeting. I'm like, what? Yeah,
so
do you just like stack it all off and go, do you know what? I don't care. I'm going to do this.
Let's do this. Why don't you I've put my number in the tab. Just give me a call later and we'll discuss this a bit further. And we're not blocking the meeting now.
Yeah.
But we'll talk about it.
Sorry.
No, you're all good, man.
It's all right. No, it's great. Thank you so much for sharing. It's fantastic. And don't forget to pray on it, okay? You're going to pray on it, Roger. What is a sane and sound ideal for handling this scheduling issue? What is a sane and sound ideal for juggling all my responsibilities? Okay, so you two will take that offline, and then you're going to pray on that, right, Roger?
Oh, well, yeah. Well, we'll see. It's been a tough
We're gonna have to go to the next person. I apologize. So I just want you to pray on that. That was it. Okay, thanks, brother. Esther Arena, let's go.
Hi, family. Karen, thank you so much. Is it Silvio or Silvio, right?
Silvio, yeah.
Oh, my goodness. I almost never manage somehow to get on this meeting. Karen knows she's very good about reminding me, and I'm very not good about showing up to this. And it's so God sent that I got to hear this message, because this is something that I discovered through my own step work. And I started sharing with my sponsees, and I was reticent to share with some other people in recovery, because sometimes I would hear from them like, yeah, but where does it say that in the big book? I'm like, okay, let's look at where it says in the big book. We're not a glum lot.
Yeah.
You know, like we serve God with like all of these things. It's like, and especially like with this idea of like you were sharing, I think that for you, 4 sponsees is like the sweet spot. For me, it's 3 sponsees. That's what God has shown me. When I've tried to take on more, everyone suffers.
Yeah,
I might have another check mark, but it really is just another way that I'm acting out and what's the word? Disassociating really from my own responsibilities, so that I'm, recovery princess or whatever to like my too many sponsees. And then the second my children come in the door, I'm screaming like, no one scream. I mean, it's all out of whack. So for me, I just really love this message. I love the joy. When I go into a meeting and I hear laughter, it's like those are the meetings that I know have healthy recovery in them. I kind of already asked the question, but I guess when I was asking about like how to give it over to my sponsees in a way where it's not just like an escapism, because a lot of times they'll be like, well, what is self-care? And I always try to say, like I'm not your properly appointed authority. These things could look very different. And very often, at least as a woman, I could say, a lot of times I'll have women say, well, I just don't have time to take 3 days off and go to the spa. And I'm like, that to me isn't self-care that we're talking about. That might be for someone. For me, that self-care is, am I spending time with higher power? That's what's going to be me caring for me. Like when I write out my list of priorities, it's God and recovery is number 1. Number 2 is me. Number 3 is my husband. Number 4 is my children. That's how it has to be. And then work and everything else. Like that's how it has to be. But do you have other ideas of like when I'm sharing with a sponsee, like how they can access different ways of self-care? Is it just prayer and then, following whatever God shows them?
Obviously, the ultimate authority is neither you nor me. So, yes, prayer and listening for guidance is vital and is the only way forward. But it is still true that as something that I've realized quite a lot is when some of my sponsees might, or other people might sort of start negotiating with the non-negotiables. They kind of go, yeah, but I don't have time. I love this. I don't have time to take 3 days off and go to the spa. Not sure if that's self-care or self-indulgence. Nothing wrong with a bit of self-indulgence if you have the time and the space for it. But the question is much rather, do you take time out if you're a busy person? Do you ever take time out, 30 minutes out, light a candle, take a bath? Does it have to be a spa right away? There's that sort of tendency to go the other way and go into an extreme the other way to show that you don't have time for self-care. And this is a really good example. Well, I don't have 3 days that I can take off and go to a really expensive spa. I don't have the money for that. Well, you don't have to, but do you look after yourself? Do you take a relaxing bath?
That
Something
alcoholic
really
thinking,
simple.
right?
Correct.
That alcoholic black or white, yes, all or nothing, right?
Indeed so.
Sorry, I interrupted you. Just keep going.
Yeah. I was going to say too about the whole time thing. I had a wonderful sponsor who gave me such a gift. She told me, Esther, there's no such thing as bad excuses. Every single excuse is fantastic. That's why we want to believe it. But I don't have to. As in, I can have 100 excuses. I have a lot of great excuses. I take care of my mom with dementia. I have 3 small children. I work a program of recovery. I have sponsees. I have a job. I have a household. I have holidays that take up entire weeks to plan. And I could literally just sit here and make excuses. Or I could be like, and what's my next right step? And what would God have me be in this moment? Okay, God just says take 5 minutes and reach out to 3 people quickly. What's up? Where's everyone holding? Whatever. I can read the big book, 5 minutes. I can put on recovery while I'm doing the dishes. Every excuse is a good excuse. But if I want to live, like you were saying, I don't say, oh, I really can't be bothered to use my inhaler right now because I want to go to the movies or something. You know, it's like life or death. Destroying, what is it? Destroying the illusion, this delusion. I don't know. Smashing the illusion. There we go.
That's brilliant. Asking us to smash the delusion. We're like other people. And what you're saying now reminds me of what it says in the big book is that the alcoholic often is quite virtuous, right? How true for the codependent that's doing all kinds of good deeds, you know, ever the good Samaritan. And like you said, that might be a function of our sickness, you know, or people overdoing service or knocking themselves out. And, you know, a price does have to be paid. It has to be a stretch, but it's simple. It's not easy. It's simple. Enjoying. Silvio, my friend, would you like to share any closing words and then pray us out? I'm getting paced over here.
Yeah. So I would just like to thank you for taking the meeting. Thank you for everyone for being here. And again, it's we need to find our own non-negotiables, just to sum this up, and they need to be worked out with our higher power and with the people around us who sponsor us. And the people around us, you know, the God squad, you know, as my sponsor always calls them, the people around you that you share recovery with. So I'll lead us out with the serenity prayer using the word God as you understand or may come to understand. God, grant me the serenity to accept the things that I cannot change, the courage to change the things that I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. So be it.
Amen. Thank you, our gentleman of recovery, our intelligent agent spearhead of God's everlasting creation.
There was a man put his hand by the side of his mouth, and he wanted to scream, but the sound never came out. So he reached for the bottle to wash the pain away, 'cause what he wanted so badly was to live a different way. And all of his problems and all of his pain filled up the puddle, rose with the rain. His ship kept on sinking to the bottom of the lake, and he knew for certain that he was just a fake. Just a fate. Was a man put his hand by the side of his mouth, and he wanted to share, but only lies ever came out. So he for the needle to numb the pain inside, and the his problem. And all of his pain filled up the puddle, rose with the rain. The ship kept on sinking, bottom of the lake. He knew for certain that he was just a fake, just a fake. Side of his mouth as he read from the book, only truth spilled out. So he reached for a power to help him through the night. 'Cause what lives in the darkness dies in the light. Yeah, what lives in the darkness dies.